Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Ramos, and welcome to season 2 of the Parent Whisperer podcast, where we are turning the hearts of parents towards their children and the hearts of children towards their parents as the best method, I believe, the best method for preventing children from going down the wrong road and choosing negative lifestyles. In today's episode, I want to drill down further on this notion that it takes a village to raise a child. If you've been listening to me any amount of time, you know that I do not believe that. We're going to look at why that is and take a little deeper, little drill down into this notion, this phrase. It takes a village to raise a child. Um, and I want to explain more about why I continue to disagree with that. Um, I think that as a parent, I'm making the assumption, I think it's a fair assumption that if you were being misled, misinformed, lied to, you would want to know that in regards to your children, where we're assuming that they are safe and we're given the counsel, we're being given the guidance, we're being given the diagnosis, we're being given the prescriptions and all these things from outside entities and authorities um, that is in the best interest of our children. And as I said in the last week and the episode of last week, it's just unfortunately not the case. So I want to be clear that I'm not, when I'm talking about these things, I'm not talking about every single teacher, every counselor, every psychologist, every psychiatrist, every doctor, every politician. Of course, there are always good people in all of these industries and professions. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of bad things that are going on, evil in certain cases. And that's what I'm talking about. So I want to be clear about that. Um, this podcast, I don't want it to be negative and a downer to anybody. The purpose of it really is to inspire, to encourage, to enlighten mom and dad in our relationship with our children. And as I've said many times, that what other relationship is more important than that, other than with your spouse? But today's children have so much pressure and so much influence. I think you've probably heard that more and more and more. You're hearing it. I don't need to go over that again, but that is my concern. And a lot of parents are losing their children right from under their nose. And so we need to really, get a handle on this. Now, I feel a duty and a responsibility to inform you, to raise your awareness about these outside forces that are not for you, that are working against you. And that's why I continue to say that it does not take a village to raise a child. It just takes good parenting. So let's look at the history of this idea. This idea of it takes a village, it gained widespread public attention in the United States when Hillary Clinton used that phrase in her 1996 book, It Takes a Village, that was focused on child welfare, education, and social policy. And while she did not coin the phrase, because she used it in the title of her book, it became very popular in the American culture. Now, to be fair, I never read her book. But just knowing what I know about Hillary Clinton and her politics and her very liberal left wing politics, I would not be surprised if it's in an alignment with the Marxist ideology that I talked about in our last episode. So I won't go over that again. Now, the origin of this phrase um, is really comes from a traditional African communal wisdom. It's not necessarily was a single person that came up with this. It takes a village to raise a child. In these cultures, in the African tradition, a child rearing was often, and in many cases still is, seen as a collective responsibility of elders and relatives, neighbors, and community members kind of all playing an active role. Now, that in itself is not bad. Uh, it was meant to develop the child, that they were not only shaped by their parents, but by social structures, moral uh, norms, shared responsibility and accountability, and community care. Fair enough. Uh, the idea of it takes a village became popular in the English countries in the early 20th century, and it started coming up more in social work, education, and anthropology writing. So that's kind of the backdrop, the origins um, of it, and what it really meant. So that in itself, I don't have a problem with. And the reason that it continues to gain popularity is because it addresses this timeless tension between individual responsibility and collective responsibility and the role of the parent. That's why it continues to um, be used in a lot of places. People still say that as if, that it was a good thing. Well, at one time it was, but in my opinion, uh, this worldview, it reflects an ancient understanding that at one time was well intentioned, uh, came from good roots, but I say it was meant for a different time, a different culture, a different place. And that's why I'm saying that now, looking at our culture, being honest about the American culture and what is going on in our village is not good. And it doesn't take a village to raise a child. It doesn't take this village anyway, because our American village, if we're being honest, cannot be trusted. From the White House, the schoolhouse, the church house, all the scandals that we've been dealing with for decades, and then often, and in too many cases, our own house, or where these abuses of children are taking place. And so I want to share with you some things, and I got to warn you, some of what I'm going to share you, it's disturbing. Um, it's uncomfortable to hear it, and often it's not believed, and that's exactly part of the problem. So I want to be clear. I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not trying to offend you. And I understand that I've counseled many families, many people, young people, adults, parents, families. Uh, I understand you may have been a victim. You may have suffered the violence and the abuse, and so I want to be sensitive to that. And these things oftentimes take place where we're thinking that children are safe, daycare centers, and these kinds of things. But what I'm finding in the research that I've done, that our world and our country, we have a long history of covering up child abuse in many forms, and it hasn't stopped. And it continues to be ignored, denied, and covered up. So I'm going to share with you some quotes from my resources that I have here in my notes, just so you know that I am simply reporting to you what others have thoroughly researched, thoroughly documented, and written about to inform the public, because the powers that be refuse to properly inform the public, especially you, mom and dad. They refuse to inform you, and in many cases, they're misinforming you. And as I said at the beginning, I'm pretty sure that if you were being misinformed, you want to know that. Okay, so let's look at the village here. The first entity in the village I want to look at is the medical pharmaceutical industry. These This information is from the book Follow the Science by Cheryl Atkinson, who is a journalist. Quote, the global demand for prescription medicine is projected to hit $1.9 trillion by 2027. TV drug ads started in 1997. By 2020, the pharmaceutical industry accounts, listen to this, for 75% of all TV ad spending in the United States, which comes out to about $4.58 billion every year. Now, that's not news to you because every other commercial that we're watching on TV is about some drug, some new drug for weight loss or heart condition or diabetes or something, some new injection, some new pill. And our country is the only one that allows pharmaceutical companies to put these ads on TV, and we are bombarded with them. The United States, think about this, the most powerful and supposedly wealthiest country in the world. We spend 4.3 billion every year or last year on healthcare. But guess who leads the world in sickness, mental illness, and disease-related death? We do. How could that be? How can we, who are the wealthiest country with all this scientific knowledge, developing all this drugs and medicine, and yet our health as a country is not good. We're leading the world in mental illness and disease-related death. Quote, she says in her book, success by the medical and pharmaceutical companies, success isn't measured by the good health of the population. Quite the opposite. It's measured by how many people are taking expensive drugs or getting vaccinated. It's not about preventing illnesses. It's about treating them indefinitely. Close quote. Think about that. They just want us to be on drugs for the rest of our life, not heal anything, not prevent anything. So what does that have to do with parents? Okay, more information from her book. The CDC consistently overcounted the number of COVID deaths in children. In other words, they lied about the numbers. The CDC misstated the estimate rate of children with symptoms of COVID, exaggerating the appearance of risk. In multiple cases, the CDC website overstated pediatric hospitalization numbers. So the important question is, why? Why did they do that? And here's the answer. The CDC's false data was used to convince parents to consent to getting their kids unnecessary vaccinations as well as multiple boosters. The false data spurred on school closings that did irreversible damage to school-aged children. Secondly, let's look at the public education. And my source for this is the book Lost in Transnation by Dr. Miriam Grossman. Quote, I discovered how children were being indoctrinated with gender ideology while writing my 2009 book. I wanted parents to know that the powerful sex ed industry has agendas that undermine the health and safety of children. It's evil, she says, to indoctrinate children with falsehoods and drive a wedge between them and their loving parents. I regret to inform you with this matter. The sources you've always trusted, your child's school, pediatrician, and therapists will likely provide ideologically driven misinformation. I've spoken to hundreds of parents who regret following the advice given by schools, pediatricians, and therapists, close quote. I mean, think about that. This is not a isolated case. This doctor, Dr. Miriam Grossman, this is national. This is what she does. She spends all her time dealing with these children and parents that were misinformed on this whole transgender ideology. Now, let's look at, again, going back to the big pharma or big pharmaceuticals. And my source for this is a book called The Anatomy of an Epidemic: Magic Bullets, Psychiatric Drugs, and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America by Robert Whitaker. Quote, by the end of the 1980s, it was clear that the chemical imbalance hypothesis of schizophrenia, that this was a disease that was put somewhat back into balance by the drugs, had come to a crashing end. In other words, the hypothesis was proven wrong. The hypothesis that a schizophrenic person, the cause of it is an imbalance, a chemical imbalance, and therefore they need a drug. All of that by the 1980s was proven wrong. Still, the public continued to be told that people diagnosed with schizophrenia had overactive dopamine systems. Not true. The study showed that that wasn't true, but the public still continued to be told this. Parents were told that children diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder suffered from low dopamine levels. Dopamine is the in our brain that makes us feel good. Oh, I'm losing the word. It's released, um, and it makes you feel good. But the only reason they were told, parents were told that was because Ritalin, this drug that they came up with, Ritalin stirred neurons to release dopamine. So in other words, first they created a drug that they found speeded up the release of dopamine. I'm not probably not pronouncing that correctly. But the drug, not the drug, but the what's released in your brain that makes you feel good. So they created this drug Ritalin. So now all they needed to do was create a problem, which the HDD, ADD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so now, oh, well, we have a cure for that. That's what he's saying. But the medicine clearly doesn't fix the chemical imbalance in the brain. Instead, it does precisely the opposite. The drugs do not normalize brain activity, but disturb it. So, in summary, number one, the medical pharmaceutical village wants to keep us dependent on drugs for life. Public education village wants to indoctrinate our children about transgender ideology. The psychiatry, psychologist, mental health village wants our children to take drugs that alter their brain and make it worse than it was before they took the prescribed drugs. And the government is complicit in all of this. And finally, the ugliest truth that is being covered up is the child sexual abuse and trafficking that is rampant on a global scale. So we we know the latest, episodes of the Epstein whole saga, the Epstein files. Um, that's just one part of it, of this rampant sexual abuse and trafficking of children. And it's just so interesting. I was reading the book, um, The Assault on Truth by Jeffrey Masson, and he talks about the history of psychoanalysis, and it just kind of explains how this abuse um, kind of again just got overlooked, denied, covered up. In 1896, Freud had finally come to his conclusion about how neuroticism was developed in his patients. This is from the book, The Assault on Truth. He stood before his colleagues to share what you and I know today as psychoanalysis. However, when he was through sharing his theory, the room was silent. Nobody agreed with this analysis, and he was shunned from the community of psychiatry. And because of his desire, obviously, to be accepted by his colleagues, he later changed his theory and denied the truth his patients had entrusted to him. What was that truth? That his patients told him they had been sexually abused at home as children. Here's what he said in his paper in 1896 that he presented to his colleagues on his theory of how people become neurotic. Quote, I therefore put forward the thesis that at the bottom of every cause of hysteria, there are one or more occurrences of premature sexual experiences, occurrences which belong to the earliest experiences of childhood, but which can be reproduced through the work of psychoanalysis in spite of the intervening decades. See what he's saying there? This is, in my paraphrase, this is what I've discovered in all the patients that I have that are neurotic. The root of it, I've come to the conclusion, is they were sexually abused as a child, but they repressed that memory. But through psychoanalysis and through talking with them, they finally came to a place where they remembered, because they had suppressed it, they remembered this abuse that went on from either a parent or somebody else in their home. Now, I know that's hard to hear. It's tragic. It's a travesty. And I don't mean to be insensitive. I'm just wanting to give you an understanding of what happened because of the pressure of what today we call cancel culture. You know, all these doctors that came out against the vaccinations that we were told were supposed to work for COVID, and we know that they didn't work because people that were vaccinated even more than once still got COVID, and on and on and on. And so anybody that came out against that, if you were on YouTube, Twitter, text, whatever, texting on Twitter and all these things, you were canceled. A lot of doctors lost their work. People got fired, on and on and on. So that's what happened to Freud. His fraternity, his colleagues, his psychiatrists, friends, colleagues told him, we don't want anything to do with that. You're wrong. And unless you change it, we don't want anything to do with you. And that's what he did. He denied his original conclusion. And this is what he did. Instead, he started telling his patients that they were either lying, telling lies, or they were revealing a hidden fantasy that they had of a desire to have sex with their parents. It's just hard for me to believe that anybody would believe that. That's what he did. My point is, this is still happening. This lying, this denying, and this covering up of the child sexual abuse that is going on and the human trafficking. And so what I'm saying is that we have ample reason, mom and dad, we have ample reasons to not trust our children to the village. Again, I am not saying every teacher, every counselor, every school, I'm not every doctor. I'm not saying that, but there is ample evidence, some of which I've just pointed out to you. And you don't have to trust me. You don't have to take my word for it. I gave you the titles of the books and the authors that I read, did my research. You can do your own. You don't have to take my word for it. And there's plenty of other books on these subjects. But this is I feel my responsibility and duty to bring these things to your attention. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be insensitive. I don't want to hurt anybody. But mom and dad, these things are directly affecting our children, and it's just too important to stay silent. I want to say that let me close by saying this. I made a promise. I used to be a youth counselor of at-risk youth um, years ago. I had a caseload of the 50 worst kids in the school, and after a while, I built a really good relationship with them, and I made a promise to those kids because I really wanted to know, why are you destroying your life? Why are you joining gangs? Why are you using drugs? Why are you dropping out of school? Why are you getting pregnant? Etc. Etc. I wanted to know what is going on, and I made a promise to them. If you will tell me the truth of what is really going on with you, I promise you that I will stand with you. I will help you. I will go to the principal with you. I will go to your home and speak with your parent. I'll do whatever I have to do. I will help you, but you got to be honest with me. And they started being honest with me. And these are the things that started coming up. They were unhappy at home for various reasons. So I've kept that promise, and by this in this podcast and in the last podcast, I can't stay silent. I'm keeping my promise to those kids, even though now they're all adults. They have their own kids now. And as I said, uh, this podcast is to be encouraging and inspiring. Don't think that every episode is going to be, this kind of stuff. But again, it's just too important to not bring it out and raise the awareness of mom and dad and how important your authority and your role and your connection and your love is. So in this podcast, the Parent Whisperer podcast, we are turning the hearts of parents to their children, the hearts of children to their parents, because I do know, and I've seen it over and over, when that heart connection is made, homes are healed, whole families are restored, and they begin to make a difference in their community. That's why in Parents on a Mission, we have honest conversations, hard conversations, and the healing that takes place that sometimes we didn't even think was possible. But we're not pretending. We repair by getting honest about the struggles behind closed doors and the strength that it takes to love through the mess. I admit our conversations might stir things up, but stay with me, because that's how we break unhealthy generational patterns and we can become the kind of parent that our children need. So listen, I want to thank you for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe and share this episode with your friends, with family members, or any parents that you feel that my message, it does not take a parent to raise oh God, it does not take a village to raise a child. It just takes good parenting. So stay tuned and always remember, Parents on a Mission is not for bad parents. It is for good parents who want to get better.